Hi, so welcome to what will be session 9, I believe. And what I want to try and cover today is perspective. I might touch on themes like expectations, but essentially what I want to try and incorporate is how we look at the world and how objective, subjective it is, and how if we can not only appreciate that, but also the fact that other people see the world potentially differently from us, and how that impacts on decisions and behaviour and things, it can be quite enlightening, especially when you're looking at relationships or problems that you've got. So let's start, if I can, with sharing a image with you. Let's have a look. How do I? So this is a image that I often would use with clients that would really give them a taste of perspective. So the image is very well known, and what you may be able to see is a young woman or an old woman. So what I would do is I would give it to clients to get them to start thinking about how it is that they see the world. And it doesn't matter whether they see the young woman or the old woman, because essentially this is one of those optical illusions, but it makes the point really clear that, and I'll point out in both of the figures so you can see. So the young woman, this is her hair, this is her ear, this is her chin, and she is looking away because that's just the tip of her nose and the eyelash, and obviously her hair and her feather, and obviously this hood and her fur coat along with her choker. So that's the young woman. The old woman is actually looking at us. So this is her nose, her mouth is there, and her chin. You can see her eyes are there. This is her fringe. And again, she's wearing a hood and a fur, but this is her face here. And the interesting thing about this little picture is how quickly people can see one or the other. And sometimes what difficulties they have seeing the alternative until it's shown them. And what that illustrates really is how we can be looking at exactly the same thing, but our perspective will alter what we see. So it's not that what we're looking at is different. So if you apply that to a situation or an argument or an issue that you might have with somebody or a problem you might have, that in itself doesn't have to change. It's just your perspective and how you view that particular thing. And the idea is, if you can start appreciating that there are other perspectives going on, that can be quite enlightening and enable you to see, in the case of an argument, somebody else's point of view, or just to see the problem differently. So rather than feeling overwhelmed and immersed in something, actually looking at it from a different angle. Got another image which I'll hopefully be able to share with you, which again I think illustrates that really well. So this one is a little cartoon that I would use as well, and it obviously says so much of our happiness depends on how we choose to look at the world. So this is, if you like, the big picture when it comes to perspective. But again, I love the image because this coach bus ride is the same coach bus ride for these two people. They are on the same vehicle, but clearly one, because of their perspective, they're looking out of the window, they can see a beautiful sky, the mountain range, and it's illuminated and it's beautiful. Whilst the person sat on the other side is just got the rock face, and it's dark and dingy and not a good thing. So this is where we can start to begin to appreciate how perspective can be so huge, even when you think, well, we're both here, we're both in the same boat. How can our perspectives differ? Another good example that I would often pose as a question to clients is if they were going to a football match, and they were with a Reds supporter, a Blues supporter, and a Green supporter, and the teams that were playing were the Reds and the Blues, and how that conversation about the game would carry on between those three people. So the Reds might be particularly critical of their team, or particularly praiseworthy of their team. The Blues the same. And where would the Greens sit? So if the Greens had got some investment in the Reds winning or the Blues winning, again, that might change their view of the game or how well the players played. The results of the game might make people happy or sad or indifferent. So once you realise that actually the context of the game itself, the football game, is the same, but how people view it, whether they thought that was a good pass or a poor pass, whether they thought the referee was correct in that decision or not, all those things can be completely different. And it's just a very useful tool to start applying in your everyday life. That, okay, I see this as X, but do they? And we often, because we're in the same situation, we assume that people are having the same experience, but they're not. And that can lead to confusion, communication breakdown, and all sorts of different issues can arise from that. A slight sort of tweak on that is how we then perceive situations. So I had a client, for example, who was convinced that people would talk about her in the staff room. And based on that perspective, based on that belief, her whole demeanour in her job and how she interacted with her colleagues altered. Now, where had that come from? So back to the perspective. So on one occasion, she had walked into the staff room and the conversation had dropped. And on the basis of that, her viewpoint was the reason the conversation stopped was because they were talking about me. Now, how does she know that? Where is her evidence for that? She hadn't got a particular grievance with any of those staff members. She hadn't got any direct current problems with them. So why would she think they would be talking about her? And I might add, not favourably. So it wasn't like, oh, they're going to be talking about what a great person I am. They were going to be talking about her in a negative way. And that's a really interesting perspective to have, isn't it, from a situation? So I started throwing out alternatives. So a bit like the coach ride, which window are you looking out of? So why do they have to be talking about you at all? Does that suggest you've got an ego? Why are you so important? What's all that about? If they were talking about you, why does it have to be negative? My computer. Oh, am I back? Looks like I might be. So apologies about that. I do occasionally get glitched and it just freezes for 60 seconds. So I'll try if I can and share my screen again. So this is a good little picture that hopefully clarifies what I'm referring to when it comes to the perspective that we sometimes take. So I've just explained about, a client who, you could argue had a degree of paranoia, but certainly had a suspicious view of what was going on when she walked into the staff room and the conversation stopped. And this is where the field of vision for a normal person can be very outward looking and potentially very positive looking. And the field of vision for an anxious person can be quite retrospective, quite backward looking. So this particular client certainly did have elements of anxiety. She had lots of concerns. She was very conscious about how she came across. She had lots of insecurities that she felt were much more visible than they really were. So if you've got a typical example might be you've got a spot on your chin. Well, you might think that spot is the biggest thing, like a beacon, flashing neon sign that people could instantly see when they're talking to you. But that's not the case. Most people, if you ask them afterwards, did you notice? They won't even have noticed that spot. But it's our perspective. Our focus can be very much inward and on what we think are our issues, our problems, our concerns. And our perspective then suggests that, well, if I'm thinking and feeling those things, that you will be able to see those things. And it's not the case. We, especially in the workplace, we mask things very well. So professionalism kicks in. And also the agenda, if you like, of other people is they're not looking for those issues in the way that you are trying to hide them. So a good example I would often refer clients to is a group photograph. So if you show a group photograph where you're in the picture, your immediate attention will be drawn to you in 99.9% of cases. How do you look? Are you smiling? Have you got your eyes shut? Does your hair look silly? It's just a natural thing that's what you'll focus in on. And if everyone is doing that, so everyone who's in that group photograph will be doing the same. So what actually means is that they're not actually worried about you, or they're not actually focused on you. So everyone's just concerned about how they are coming across in that particular picture. So by the very nature of that, they're not looking to see whether your hair is messy or whether you've got your eyes shut or whatever. And if anything, what they will do as a group is, assuming they think they look okay, they will take the picture as a nice representation of that moment in time and not scrutinize everyone else in it. Because it's proven that we don't scrutinize others because often we're too inward looking. We're too worried about our own self to scrutinize others. So group photographs. So think about that next time you look at a group photograph, and who are you looking at, and what are your thoughts behind that? And there was another example that I could give you as well on that one. Yes, so there was some scientific research done, and they put 10 strangers in a room and allowed them to chat over some snacks and some drinks. So all these 10 people got a chance to spend time, interacting, finding out a little bit about them. They then took pictures, or they'd got pictures of all these 10 people. And what they did is they had the accurate picture in the middle. And then they had ones on the one side, which had been cosmetically, aesthetically improved. So skin tones and evened out and any sort of whispers. So improved. And then 10 that had been worsened. And what they then did is they asked the individuals of the 10 photographs to pick out of those 10, having met them, having spent some time chatting to them, where they felt they were on the scale out of 10. And consistently, what happened was the individual, when they were picking themselves out, picked themselves out to be one of the worst photographs, which had been tampered to look worse. So they didn't pick the accurate one. They picked one or two, if not more, stages down. And everyone else in the room, so the other 9 people, asked to pick which picture they thought was them. And they picked more favourably. So they didn't pick the accurate one necessarily either, but they might, either way, they either picked the accurate one or they picked a better, cleaner, aesthetically more pleasing picture of them. So what did that tell the people that were conducting the experiment? That essentially we see ourselves worse. We are more scrutinizing of ourselves, especially our appearance. And what they then asked of the people who had picked nicer pictures, they asked why. And it came down to people being animated. So when you see somebody animated, you see their smile, you see their demeanor, their eyes might crinkle when they talk or laugh, and all those animated aspects of our character come out. And in most instances, unless you're in a conflict with somebody, in a positive environment, they come across as pluses. So what people were doing were picking pictures because they go, oh, she was lovely. She was lovely. So therefore she must look lovely. Therefore she must look really, really nice. And the one that picked that and accentuated that was the one that they selected. So perspective, even when we're using our eyes, isn't 100% accurate. And certainly when we're in our heads, it's not 100% accurate. And when you start to appreciate that and impact that that can have on decisions, relationships, the way you conduct yourself. Another example where people have said, oh, I was going somewhere and my ex blanked me. Okay. So you were going somewhere and there was a pass there and your ex blanked you. Yeah. So your ex saw you. Oh, they must have done. They must have done. So again, you're getting into this whole narrative based on assumptions, based on the perspective that because you saw them on the street, that they must have seen you. And again, further questioning of this particular client, why would they blank you? Have you got a good relationship with this person, etc., etc.? None of it made any sense to why they would be blanked. So the conclusion that we derived was they probably actually didn't see you. There was no blanking. That's in your head, with your insecurities, not with that person. Now, the only way we could actually get conclusive proof is by asking that person, did you see them on this time? But I would almost quite confidently suggest that unless there's a reason, you weren't blanked. That person didn't see you. And how many times have we walked down the street and not seen people and not seen situations and stepped on? We're not necessarily as present as we think. Apologies. Right, apologies about the glitch. If I can, I might try and see if I can edit it out later, but I'm not sure I've got the know-how to do that. So bear with me. But hopefully you grasped what I was saying about perspective and how that impacts on our behaviour, our thoughts about things. If you have done the session on thought monitoring, this is when it can tie in with that session. So if we start looking at our perspective and our thoughts on things and processing them, thought monitoring and the unhelpful thinking styles will help you with processing your perspective a little bit more. So to illustrate the power of perspective, I will endeavour to share with you a very well-known person who, this is purely a sort of snippet, but his name was Viktor Frankl. And I will read briefly through this and hopefully try and make this available to you as a post as well. But essentially, Frankl was a determinist raised in the tradition of Freudian psychology, which postulates that whatever happens to you as a child shapes your character and personality and basically governs your whole life. The limits and parameters of your life are set, and basically you can't do much about it. Frankl was also a psychiatrist and a Jew, and he was imprisoned in the death camps of Nazi Germany, where he experienced things that were so repugnant to our sense of decency that we shudder to even repeat them. His family were sent to the gas chamber, apart from his sister, and Frankl himself was tortured. And he never knew whether his path would lead to the chamber, whether he would be one of the saved ones. He could never know that. So One day, naked and alone in a small room, he began to become aware of what he later called the last of the human freedoms. His freedom, his Nazi captors could not take away. They could control his entire environment. They could do what they wanted to his body. But Viktor Frankl himself was self-aware being who could look as an observer at his very involvement. His basic identity was intact. He could decide within himself how all of this was going to affect him. Between what happened to him, all the stimulus, and his response to it was his freedom or power to choose that response. So in the midst of his experiences, Frankl would protect himself into different circumstances, such as lecturing his students after his release from the death camps. He would describe himself in the classroom in his mind's eye and give his students the lessons he was learning during every torture. Through a series of such disciplines, mental, emotional, and moral, principally using memory and imagination, he exercised his small embryonic freedom until it grew larger and larger, until he had more freedom than his Nazi captors. They had more liberty, but he had more freedom, more internal power to exercise his options. He became an inspiration to those around him, even to some of the guards. He helped others find meaning in their suffering and dignity in their prison existence. In the midst of the most degrading circumstances imaginable, Frankl used the human endowment of self-awareness to discover a fundamental principle about the nature of man. Man has freedom to choose. And there's a little diagram here, really just to illustrate that point even further, that we have that freedom to choose. We have the freedom to respond in a way that we decide. And what this piece goes on to say is that human beings are quite unique in that. That other animals, other species don't have that ability. So this lifts us above the animal world, the extent to which we exercise and develop these powers between whatever we're being stimulated by and our response, and how we can choose that. It's incredibly powerful when you suddenly realize that, as with that coach trip, I can just look out of a different window. I can reframe this and I can see this differently. And I think that's a key point to it, is that, Frankl, under incredible duress, was able to free his mind and able to put himself in a different perspective. He was able to pity the guards because, in many ways, they were under life or death threat as well. They had to carry out these atrocities. They had no choice. If they didn't carry out these atrocities, they themselves would be shot. And that's a difficult decision as well. So, again, as much as he saw the guards as all being, nasty and negative, actually, in many ways, they were victims of circumstance themselves. It's an incredible, powerful piece. So I would definitely recommend you looking at him more. What other things as well, just to really stimulate yourself even more. Let's have a look. So I'll share this. I might indeed talk about this more in another session. So this is illustration of, of where Frankl self-awareness and perspective got to him. So, we are in that middle point. What we control is very much within ourselves. So our thoughts, our freedom to choose, whether we put our hand on our head or raise our hand up, we have a lot of control like that. But what we don't have is control over others. So we might have influence. So you may be in a position where you can encourage, support, reassure, guide, teach, and you could influence others. But beyond that, you have no control. So you don't directly control somebody else to whether they put their hand on their head or their hand up there. You don't have that kind of control. And that's where we need to focus on that. We need to focus on what we do control, what's within our control. And that freedom to choose and that perspective that we have is something that we can control. I've got a couple of worksheets as well that I think would be quite useful as well to work through. This is actually not what I was going to show you, but give me the serenity to accept things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, so what's within your control, and the wisdom to know the difference. And I think that little sentiment is very valuable, because what we control and what we don't control can sometimes be a massive frustration. So I often would speak to clients who were frustrated by other people and other things. Well, that's beyond their control. So you can continue to be frustrated with that until the end of time. It's about, well, what can you do? What do you control? If you know the difference, if you understand the difference, perhaps you can make small changes. So I gave you the example of my client who'd walked into the staff room and felt that everyone had stopped. We talked about positive action that she could take so she could start going into the staff room more, because I suspect she didn't go in very often. So there was probably a lot of not expecting to see her there. So, befriend these colleagues, get more sociable with them and see how that rolls. And, inevitably it's a much more positive experience. So we do have control. We just need to recognise where it is. And then coping statements, which I would throw out to clients all the time, again, because our perspective can sometimes get quite overwhelming. Everyone behaves according to their own values and rules. I will be doing a session on your personal values, but what you think is morally correct or what you believe is the right thing to do isn't necessarily what other people will. So again, back to those control circles. People don't have to do what I think is right. If it is beyond my control, let it go. Very strong message. Stay focused. Remember the big picture. So again, allowing your anxieties and all your issues to impact on what you're doing can have a negative impact on how you behave. Keep your cool, and you are in control. They are not perfect, and neither am I. So in a situation or an argument or a problem, trying to remind yourself that other people are not perfect. Back to Franklin, the guards weren't perfect. Neither was he. We're all human beings. People are just people, and they are neither good or bad. So I do apologise. And the most important thing, life really isn't fair. And again, it's kind of a cliche thing to say, but it's true. Bad things happen to good people and good things happen to bad people. It is just how the world works. So that wasn't what I was going to show you, if I can. Give it that one. Let's see if I can get that one up. This is just an interesting sheet because it reminds us about it's called assertiveness rights, but it's about your perspective, your control, and if you feel empowered, that can make a big difference. So I have the right to be the judge of what I do and what I think, back to the bits that you control, that inner circle. The right to offer no reasoning excuses for my behaviour. The right to refuse to be responsible for finding the solution to other people's problems, so everything doesn't fall in your lap. The right to make mistakes. The right to be consulted about decisions affecting me. The right to change my mind. The right to be listened to. The right to be treated with respect. The right to ask for what I want. The right to be left alone. The right to make my own decisions. The right to consider my own needs. The right to say I don't know, and the right to say no without guilty feeling. That is, the right to do anything so as long as it does not violate the rights of anyone else. So again, back to that control. If we control ourselves in a positive way, if we become self-aware of our perspective and how our perspective of others can be distorted and not necessarily accurate. All these things can make a big difference to how we manage, how we deal with issues, and how anxious and overwhelmed we can feel. If you feel that everything is your responsibility, that's a big burden. Whereas if you understand that it's not, and that actually other people are responsible and other people have things to take on board, then again your anxiety and the pressure on you can be reduced. So finally, this is quite a long session, and as you can see, there's been lots of aspects to cover really. But I want to, and again, I'll try and get these documents as posts so you can have a look at them closer. But there are some little sort of challenge sheets that you can do that will question your perspective and your outlook and make you think a little bit more. And as we've discussed, as soon as you have that sort of self-awareness, it opens up all manner of things. Once you realise that you could look out of the coach by a different window, that actually, your perspective on a group photograph is very different from somebody else's, it gives you a very enlightened view of the world. So here are some challenge sheets. Let's see if I can. So this first one is called What You Believe Tends to Become True for You. Make your own movie. You can make believe anything. You create your creation. Have you watched a film and thought it was incredibly moving, but your friend didn't think so? Have you found something stressful, but your colleague didn't? You are the one who creates these feelings. Simply tell yourself that it is true. Collect evidence which supports your story and then act accordingly. So write down your top 3 goals in any area of your life. For each one, write out 3 things that it would be useful to make believe were true. There's an example there. And then actively make believe what you want by doing any or all of the following exercises. Tell yourself that it's true, gather evidence that it's true, and then act as if it's true. And it's amazing how powerful, and one of the other sessions I've talked about mantras, how powerful this process can be when you start saying, I'm going to do this so I can, I will. I'm going to enable myself to do it. I'm going to whatever. Once you start focusing and believing that you can achieve it and that you have got the skill set to achieve it, nothing can stop you. It's all doable. Practicing those different aspects can be really useful. And the example goal to be blissfully married to the perfect person for me. And then the make-believes are, there are a number of people who could be the perfect person for me. I am a great catch. And the more people I date, the easier it will be to find the perfect person. So that's a really good challenge sheet to have a look at. Let's have a look at another one. So this one is called Whose Life Is It Anyway? And write a paragraph or 2 about a situation or area of your life where you would like things to be different. And then go back through what you have written and circle any phrases when you have attributed qualities of being stressed, fearful, etc. Rewrite your story as if those qualities are things you bring to your own experience, not to get from it. Most experiences are temporary and therefore changeable. Rewrite your story as if you were truly the creator of your experience. What would be your goals and intentions? And this is, again, reinforcing the idea of perspective. If you think that something is rubbish, then it's rubbish. Whereas if you think something's changeable, can be improved, can be altered, then why isn't that true as well? So the world is what you think it is. You will always tend to see whatever it is you are looking for. You are creating your experience of life right now, moment by moment. And then finally, again, another good one that I would use with clients is, how do you see the world right now? So answer the following. Life is, I am, people are, money is, the most important thing to know about happiness is. So that's getting all your perspectives on things. So as we've discussed, they're not necessarily accurate, but it is your current perspective. And then when you start looking at how you feel about things, is it positive? Is it negative? Is it unfair? Is it critical of yourself? You can then start processing it. Can you think of lots of evidence and examples to back them up? So if you think people are horrible, where is your evidence? If you think life is great, where's your evidence? And invariably, you will find that evidence. Again, apologies for any glitching. So finally, we live in our own separate reality. Our brains filter information through the 5 senses and then make representations of that information inside our minds. You think lavender smells lovely, someone else doesn't, makes them think of old people. We then experience these representations first as thoughts and as emotions. And that mentions the football game that I said about with the Reds and Blues, but I also mentioned green as an added perspective. Shakespeare wrote, "There is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so." So, yeah, again, your perspective counts. The world is what you think it is. You will always tend to see whatever it is you're looking for. You are creating your experience of life right now, moment by moment. So hopefully it's quite a lengthy session, but I think perspective is a massive subject, and I've kind of touched on it hopefully from different angles with examples that you can relate to. I'll try and make all those sheets available as posts, and it's something that you can start giving some thought to. Okay, thanks for watching.